Good evening to those bored enough to watch. Growing up in my early childhood, I was never a fan of superhero characters. I only grew up with a few of them, such as Batman and the subject of the one I'll be talking about in this video, Spider-Man. I'm sure by now a lot of people would have played or at the very least heard of the game that had released in 2018 for the PlayStation 4. I did around the same time it released, and since then I've grown to love this game. Not only because of its gameplay, but because of the story that it tells among many of the other aspects that I think make this game amazing. In this video I want to talk about that, though that will be in due course. Development on this game began in 2014, after Insomniac Games had released its Xbox One exclusive at the time, Sunset Overdrive. Sony's vice president of product development spoke with the CEO of Insomniac Games, Ted Price, and proposed the idea of the studio working on a game based on a Marvel property. While he had recalled having a fairly neutral response, his developers were enthusiastic about this project. Before this, Activision were the ones behind Spider-Man titles, and majority of them were based on pre-existing movies and were tied directly to them. This wouldn't be the case with this project. Marvel didn't want this project to be based on a movie, and so the team at Insomniac chose to work with Spider-Man, as they related to the concept of the contrast between Spider-Man and Peter Parker. The creative director of the game, Brian Intihar, said, "I feel like he's the most relatable of the characters. As much as I love Tony Stark, it's hard to identify with a billionaire. As much as I love Thor, it's hard to identify with a god." When talking about Spider-Man, he says, "Peter makes mistakes. He has ups and downs in his career, his relationships, his family. I think we could all relate to that." So, with the use of the same engine that was used to make Sunset Overdrive as well as Ratchet & Clank in 2016, and approximately 4 years of development, Marvel's Spider-Man was released on September 7th of 2018. As previously mentioned, I played this game around the same time it released without any prior knowledge going into it. At the time I simply saw a game based on a character I liked and was simply intrigued enough to want to play it. At the time, I eventually beat the game, though in hindsight I really do think I was too young to fully grasp and understand the story that this game told aside from just the main plot points. Eventually, when I was more older, I went back to replay the game, in which I found that I had a newfound love for this game, and in this video that hopefully won't get content ID claimed, I want to talk about that. So, with that said, let's discuss Marvel's Spider-Man. The game's opening cinematic sees the camera panning over sentimental items such as family photos, concepts for things that could be used for the Spider-Man suit, as well as countless news articles for villains in the game. We then pan to a phone going off, calling any nearby officers to the Fisk Tower. This fully awakes a now intrigued Peter Parker, who rushes to start his day. Putting on his suit and setting up his breakfast, he eventually leaps out of his apartment window and into the city. We then transition to gameplay and call Captain Yuri Watanabe, of whom we convince to let us help take down Fisk, and so we're told to go to his tower. I love this game's opening cinematic. I will talk more about this opening section as a whole in due course, but I really like the way that this cutscene is representative of where Peter Parker is in his adult life, trying to balance his life as Spider-Man and himself, showing his family photos and pieces of technology he uses for his suit. It also shows how his life as Peter Parker is sometimes neglected through wrappers of energy bars, but the fact that he needs reminders for things like his rent and overall how unkept his apartment is. Furthermore, this cutscene also foreshadows a lot of the villains that we'll be fighting in this game, as well as the story in general, as seen by a book about Norman Osborn and the many secrets he hides from the public. Additionally, there's a lot of humor here too, such as the sticky notes on the wall here for things such as debuting a new catchphrase, finding out Yuri's birthday, or mailing J. Jonah Jameson flowers as a secret admirer. This scene here shows so much of Peter's character without him even needing to say anything, and that's something I really appreciate about this game. Though, with that aside, on our way to the Fisk Tower, we swing into a gunfight between officers and Fisk's men. This section of the game provides as the tutorial for the combat in this game, in which I will talk about more in due course. But for now, after we help the officers, we continue onwards to the Fisk Tower, and when we get there, we arrive to an ongoing gunfight. We approach Watanabe, who tells us that if he makes it out of his tower, he'll escape, and so we're given the green light to venture into the tower and go after him ourselves, and thus we fight through more of his men. Before we can go in to outright confront him, we need to take a detour to his server room to preserve evidence of Fisk's stealings to put him away behind bars for good. So, after taking a venture through the vents and taking out more of his men, we successfully preserve the evidence and fight more of them. Subsequent to that, a bomb goes off, and so with manpower slowly running thin, we venture into the burning building to help the innocent people evacuate, in which after we do so, we fight through more of Fisk's thugs before we go in for the showdown against Fisk. This boss fight is one which sees his attacks be very predictable. He throws, lunges and punches at you, all of which are very easy to dodge, but when he hits you hard. That is how most boss fights in this game are, though the predictability of their attacks differ depending on the fight, as the cues for such attacks during boss fights become harder to notice as the game goes on. Though for now, we defeat Fisk can watch as he's arrested. As he's sent away, he exclaims that everyone will wish they had him back, though for now, our boss at our other job calls us to ask where we are, mentioning that a committee of some sort will be there shortly and that they need to run an equipment check, and so we need to get there before he tries to do so himself. I love the opening section of this game. It's an adrenaline rushing start to the game that not only allows for the player to become accustomed to the gameplay and the combat, but it allows for them to become immersed into the action and the story of the game. With such an attention grabbing start, anyone would be invested in the story, the characters, and where the game goes with telling this story. With that, we arrive at the laboratory where we work, where we find Otto Octavius, who appears to be testing a prosthetic. All seems to be going well until the power dampener begins to fail, causing for the abortion of the testing. As Octavius put it, a minor setback, but they appear to be close to achieving desired results. However, the aforementioned committee arrives. Otto tells us to take the day off while he discusses matters privately with the skeptical officials in private. Despite our early dismissal, we decide to check the arm and make an attempt at fixing it, and thus we enter a puzzle section of the game where we need to try and properly route the power. As the game goes on, these will get more challenging, as we'll need to also match the voltage with our target one. I really like these puzzles. They're quick, concise, and don't waste anyone's time. They engage the player through the goal being easily understandable and the mechanics equally as so. After we're done repairing the arm, we go and review the work that Otto's been doing with testing new materials for prosthetics, and so we enter a minigame which sees us matching the absorption spectrums with the given patterns, in which are also very fast and don't waste a lot of time. So, after we're done, we decide to head off work for the day. One of the many subtle details I want to talk about in this section of the game is just how the relationship between Otto and Peter is portrayed. Throughout the story, we will be seeing more moments of bonding between the two as the plot intensifies and we learn more about Otto. However, Otto really does care for Peter and thinks highly of him. One of the many examples is that if you listen into snippets of conversations between Otto and the committee in a locked room in the laboratory, you will hear Otto come to the defense of Peter when the conversation shifts to him, describing him as indispensable and a genius in the making. I really like how this game has so many subtle details within. Whether it acts as foreshadowing for later events in the story or not, it really is interesting to indulge in and find out so many details in this game, and I think that's worth appreciating. With that aside though, we get called to the precinct by Watanabe and are told about Oscorp's surveillance technology and how all of its towers had gone offline. We fix and bring it back online and are asked to do the same with the other towers and also stop a nearby robbery, after of which we stop an assault and save a woman by the name of Gloria. When we learn that she has nowhere to go, we point her towards a feast center. With that moment aside, we go and activate more towers. Once we're done with that, Peter notices that his suit is ripped from his fight with Fisk earlier, and so after confirming that Octavius has left the laboratory for now, we go back there to work on fixing it. When we get there, we begin working on the suit, though during that process Otto walks in on us trying to fix it. Despite our attempts to hide it, he ultimately sees the suit and thus is now in on our big secret, that we designed the technology for Spider-Man. He leaves us to it, and when we awake the next morning, we see that we've been left a note to check our email, and when we do so we find that Otto took the time to sketch out some of his own improvements for the suit, and thus we're open to more of the game. The suit is something I will talk about in due course, but for now I'll mention that we can also upgrade and interact with the game's progression system. There are only a handful of upgrades, and during my playthrough of this game I rarely interacted with it, and I think that reflects upon how flexible this game's combat is. As mentioned, I'll talk more about it as the game gets more challenging, but for now I'll say this. I really like how this game gives you enough for it to be fun and engaging without handicapping you, and without essentially forcing you to interact with the progression system. Everything here is entirely optional and only adds to your pre-existing flexibility and great arsenal of movements and controls. I'll talk more about this in due course, but for now we swing out into the city of New York with our new suit, and under it, the same old Peter Parker. We get a call from Watanabe instructing us to go and investigate a Fisk construction site, in which when we get there we find that the employees there are doing anything but constructing, and so we're tasked with shutting this operation down. Seeing how for the large majority, these hideouts see us fighting a lot of people, one of the many things I want to talk about is the combat of the game, in which I think is amazing. Everything about it, from the controls feeling incredibly responsive to the combat itself, felt amazing to play with. Building up combos, taking fights into the air and using the finishes all were great components of this system. One way to easily take out enemies is to attack them and then try to shoot webs at them whenever they're near walls or they're knocked to the ground, as they will end up getting stuck to whatever surface they were closest to. Furthermore, if you wrap your enemies in webs and then knock them to a nearby surface, whether it be a wall or the ground, they will get stuck to it when they land. It's difficult to fight a lot of enemies at once, in which with the right suit you can fight a lot of enemies simultaneously, but the game does give you options for how you want to approach the combat. I really like that. You get the freedom on how you want to play the game, and that's something I really appreciate. I personally chose chose to divide and conquer during battles, which saw me launching enemies into the air whenever things would get too intense on the ground, in which really did help with managing the battles and keeping things under control. Furthermore, I really did enjoy the combat that comes with playing on the spectacular difficulty of the game, which is the hardest, as it really does engage you with the game and picking up on cues for an enemy's attack, whether it be the spider sense or the enemies themselves. If an enemy hits you, they'll hit you hard, and that really does give incentive to pay attention to your surroundings regardless of how hectic things can get when fighting enemies. Overall, I think that the combat was really satisfying to play with, and overall I really enjoyed it in this game. With that, after we're done fighting all of Fisk's men, we go and do some landmarking in New York, and thus we go and take a picture of the Empire State Building. There are a lot of points in which we can landmark around the city, as well as a lot of Fisk hideouts that we can visit for more combat if we please to do so. This mostly acts as side content for the game, and we will unlock more of it as the game goes on. For now though, we get a call from a man named Martin Lee, of whom are setting up a party for May Parker and need some more time to do so. He'll let us know when to arrive, but in the meantime we have some time to kill. The game has a lot of sections where the main story briefly takes a pause, which gives the player the opportunity to indulge in some of the side content within the game, in which I will talk more about that concept in due course. For now, I want to talk about how beautiful this game looks. Everything from the lighting, the shading, the way that it reflects off buildings, and so much more that make this game a beauty to look at, especially so at night. It only adds to the fun that comes with being able to swing across the city, which feels great to do. I truly had a lot of fun swinging in this game. Building up speed and just being able to traverse the city in such a fun way was genuinely so amazing to indulge in, and I enjoyed it a lot. What adds to it are conversations Peter has with people during them, whether it be Watanabe, May, or other characters that we'll be introduced to later in the game. I really did have a lot of fun swinging through the city and just listening into the conversations between the characters in the game. With that though, we eventually get called into Feast by Martin Lee, and when we get there we're told to distract May while everyone gets everything set up for a birthday party. So that's what we go and do. We try to keep our attention away from everyone setting things up in the background before ultimately she sits down, and thus we tell her what everyone's been saying. May is someone who sacrifices a lot but in return asks for nothing. People need help and she rises to that occasion, in the same way Peter does as Spider-Man, but different people help in different ways. For Peter it's Spider-Man, and for May it's helping those in need. Feast is a friendly place, filled with a lot of different people. Interacting them would show you that they're all tightly connected, and it's as though it's one big family here. People here have developed a sense of belonging in the shelter, and while their goal is ultimately to get back on their feet, part of that involves making a few friends along the way. Feast allows for them to do just that in a safe and comfortable environment, and I really like how the game shows that just through interactions with them alone. Back with the party, we thank Lee for setting all of this up before we get a notification on our phone and leave early. It appears to be a voicemail from Watanabe, and thus we check it outside. We're asked to go and check out an auction house hosted by Fisk's estate quietly, as Watanabe doesn't want to make a scene if it's nothing. When we get there, we find that there's a masked gunman with a single hostage, threatening her into giving them a file of some sort. Though she claims not to have it, there's someone else here in the building and it must be under their possession. Though these gunmen don't believe her and continue to pressure her into giving it to them. We need to take these people out silently, as if we're spotted, they'll shoot her. This means that we need to use stealth. There are a lot of stealth sections in the game, and at times such as the Fisk hideouts, you will have the choice on whether you want to take out enemies silently or fight them all. I personally don't really like stealth, not because it's bad, but because most of the time there's no reason to use it. It takes a lot more time away during the mission, and doing so grants you no advantages. Why would I take the additional time to stealthily take down enemies when I can go into combat with them, which takes less time and allows for me to move on with the game quicker? The only time I actively used stealth is when the game actively punished me for not doing so, or when I'm playing as a character that doesn't give me any other option but to use it. I think that the stealth shows promise, but is heavily underutilized, and the average player wouldn't use it unless it's the only option they had. With that, after taking out a few more of these strange masked men, we find a camera, and before we can mention the name of the person it belongs to, we get told to freeze, though before they can do anything, they get hit over the head and knocked unconscious. This is Mary Jane Watson. She's a reporter for the Daily Bugle and is here covering the estate sale. So as she explains to Peter, we cut to a flashback where we play as her. When she's turned away by the estate agent, she fakes a phone call to convince her to change her mind, and so we take a brief look at all of the items on display, get a tour of more items on display before we get to take a photo for the cover. When we notice a statue that's out of place, things are cut short and we're told we need to leave, though we ask to go to the bathroom before we do so. Thus, now that her attention is away from us, we need to quietly make our way back to that room to investigate further. Stealth is a lot more enjoyable when playing as characters such as MJ because we're actually punished if we fail. Though with that aside, when we get past her without her noticing, we investigate this statue, which was used to hide evidence by Fisk through a compartment that can open. Thus we're to now solve a puzzle to get it to do so, and when we do, we find a file labelled Devil's Breath, with Norman Osborn's name on it. Though before we can ponder any further, the masked gunmen arrive. We cut back to the present where Peter assembles a plan for MJ to hide, him to take out the gunman, and for her to escape. So we enter another section of gameplay where we need to use stealth, though this is quickly abandoned as MJ gets caught. One of them takes the file and we're tasked with fighting the rest of them. After we do so, we take the mask from one of of them to take it to someone who can help us track down where it came from. So that's a job for later, before we get out of there as backup Watanabe mentioned arrives. Back with MJ, she's confronted about her trickery into the building, and as she reveals who she really was, he tries to get an interview out of the agent, though is only met with refusal as she walks away. MJ gets a text from Peter as the two agree to have dinner together. So at the restaurant, the two engage in conversation, ranging from the masked gunmen to Octavius Industries as well as their own relationship. But before they can talk anything about that, police cars race outside, and thus we're forced to take our leave. So with a cameo from the late great Stan Lee, we cut back to Peter, who's told that Shocker is committing a robbery after he got paroled. So when we get to his location, we catch him just in time as he tries to make his escape. This causes for us to have to chase him around the city, in which while we do so, he refuses to tell us why he's robbing again. Eventually we catch him and discuss with MJ that we're going to Feast to ask Martin Lee about the masks we saw earlier. He has a degree in arts history and thus his insight might be useful. When we bring out the mask and ask him about it, his mood changes as he tells us that MJ should drop the story. The mask correlates to demons, and it could be connected to dangerous people. But with that, we called MJ to tell her about what we found out, and after of which we have some free time before we have to go to the laboratory to meet with Otto, and find this a good time to patrol the city. At the lab with Otto, we find him with an individual testing the prosthetics that the two have been working on, in which is sullied by the committee arriving to confiscate equipment that the two require to continue their work. This is where we see Norman arrive, in which we see Otto and himself discuss the confiscation. Otto is offered a place at Oscorp to continue his work, in which he refuses. This is the moment where we see the establishment of the fact that Norman and himself aren't on the best terms. We'll be seeing more of this in due course, but for now Norman leaves and we're told that Peter can't be paid without funding from the mayor, and if Otto were him, he'd start looking for a new job. We'll try to think of something to help Otto later. For now we've got to go to one of Harry Osborn's research stations to check on it while he's seemingly on a trip to Europe. These are scattered around the city, and if we can't prove their worth and usefulness to the city, Oscorp will shut them down. Harry doesn't want this to happen. These projects were kickstarted by his late mother, and as they're in the city, it feels like part of his mother is too. So with that, we're open to more side content we can do. I'll talk more about these later, but for now, after monitoring and noticing intrusions to the air quality, we're told by Watanabe that Shocker has escaped. On our way there, we're told that a guard let him out while in a trance, and strangely enough, his eyes were glowing. With that, we go to the bank that Shocker's robbing and enter a boss fight against him. During a search, we try to get answers out of him as to why he's robbing again, in which he states that whoever he's doing it on the behalf of will kill him if he says anything, though refuses to elaborate further. After we beat him, we deduce that he's working with the demons, and ask Yuri to let us know if there are any other reports of them causing mayhem. With that, we decide we have a bit more free time and decide to do more activities around the city. As mentioned, this game has a lot of sections where the main plot pauses briefly, in which gives us time to catch up with side content around the city or just wander around. I think that symbolically these brief periods of time exemplify the fact that Peter is a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. No threat is too big, whether it be a supervillain wreaking havoc in the city or a robbery, no threat is too big or too small, he's there to stop it. While symbolically I think that it's interesting, it doesn't translate well into gameplay. There are way too many sections of the game where the main story is paused, in which is the game momentarily forcing us to do side content. I want to do said content because, well, I want to do it, not because the game is deliberately pausing the main story and essentially forcing me to. I, for one, don't understand why the game does this. You get to traverse through the city at all times of the game. You're shown where you need to go, but you're not forced to go there right away. If the player wanted, they could just stop whatever they're doing for the main story to go and do side content without anything stopping them from doing that. It should be their choice on whether they want to or not, and I don't understand why the game feels the need to actively pause the main story and essentially give us no other choice but to do them. It slows the pacing of the game down, unnecessarily at that, and one way that the game could improve upon this is to either do sections like this less frequently as to maintain the pace of the game. We get a call from Watanabe, in which we're told that demons have been busy all night attacking Fisk properties, suspected to be the beginning of a gang war. Watanabe sends an officer by the name of Jefferson Davis to the location while we make our way to a shipyard that they're yet to attack. When we get there, we take out Fisk's men, of whom are in the area before Officer Davis arrives. We find a way into the building and begin searching around for anything. In doing so, we find a hidden floor and begin investigating it. Inside, we find a ransacked armory. The demons found a way here before we did, in which we eventually discover was through an imploded back door. We find them loading a truck preparing for their getaway, and thus we go and fight them. They make their getaway, which sees us chasing after their truck while Davis says he'll catch up. During such a chase, the truck crashes into an oil truck, which means that we have to leave the demons to save the driver and his truck from being hit by a train. However, while we do that, we're left vulnerable, and just as we're about to be hit by the demons, Davis crashes his car into the truck, shielding us momentarily. When we're done securing the oil truck, we go to help Davis up, in which he's showered in praise for his acts of heroism. We also run into MJ, who's been put on CEB after her operation at the auction house, and goes to focus on getting a comment from Davis. One of the many things I want to appreciate is how this game portrays that concept of heroism. There are so many characters who find alternative ways to help people and be their own hero. May Parker helping people at Feast, MJ willingly putting herself at risk to help stop the demons, and as we just saw, Davis putting himself at stake. Of course, we have Peter, who is not only Spider-Man but makes efforts to do things to change the world, such as through his work on prosthetics with Otto. We will see a lot more characters who embody their own concept of heroism, and I really appreciate how the game shows that people don't need superpowers to be a hero. There are so many ways to do so, and people don't let the fact that they don't have the same abilities as Peter to stop them from trying. Though, with that aside, Peter decides to go home and get some rest, in which when he gets there, he finds that eviction proceedings have been commenced on his belongings, in which he has to go and find them or whatever dumpster truck took them when they were thrown away. He doesn't care about anything else, he just needs his flash drive, which contains all of his research that he deems invaluable, as it's everything he's researched and worked on since the beginning of his career as Spider-Man. After stopping a robbery and recovering his Spidey drive, we get a call from someone presumed to be the Black Cat, in which we're then shown her stakeouts across the city. Once again, more things to do as side content. With that aside though, we call Aunt May and inform her of the eviction, in which we then go to Feast to stay for the night. We awake in the morning to a cup of coffee and an envelope from May, in which when engaging in conversation with her, we're approached by Martin Lee, who tells us that he'll be away for a while. He doesn't know how long he'll be away, but he asks May to take care of the place. After all, it represents the best part of him. We get a call from MJ, who'll be attending the award that Officer Davis will be getting from Norman, of whom is the mayor of the city, and we're asked to join her. Before we get there though, we go to a Fisk construction site to find it under attack by demons, in which we fight them off. After that, we pick up a call from Fisk on one of his men's phone, and tells us that he'll inform us of the leader of the demons if we keep his men from being killed by them. After we do so, we're told to go to the roof of the building where we see demons making their getaway on a helicopter. We try to stop them, but we only end up giving them a makeshift wrecking ball instead, and so we have to go and chase the helicopter around the city and stop it from wrecking anything else. After stopping the helicopter from hitting ground and hurting civilians, we watch as someone named Miles goes for his father's award ceremony. Back with Peter, we make our way there ourselves now that we're finished stopping the demons for now. We cut to Officer Davis, who's conversating with his son Miles and his wife Rio. He doesn't see himself as a superhero, just as a guy who doesn't give up. Showing nervousness about public speaking, his family goes into the crowd, meanwhile Davison goes to the stage. While Norman Osborn gives a speech, Peter and MJ discuss the possibility of the gang war being over, in which Peter mentions the consolidated shipping truck that he saw when he was going to stop the demons. The two agree to meet later to discuss, though for now we watch as Jefferson Davis is awarded the Medal of Honor as he goes to give a speech, though during the speech, Norman takes a call, threatening him about what's to come in a few moments. He takes his leave, while the rest of the city is left oblivious until the last moment. Peter senses that something is amiss, and when we go to investigate, he sees multiple bombers launching an attack at the ceremony. Among them, he sees Martin Lee. Officer Davis, in an act of heroism, pushes another nearby bomber away from his colleague as the bomb he carries goes off. Peter pushes MJ to the ground as the explosion echoes throughout the city. Miles awakes. This ceremony that once saw people brought together in unity and commemoration now sees people frantically running for their lives. Wreckage has been hammered down upon this area as we go after Rio, who's ventured to find Davis. Eventually we find her ledged between the ground and a large piece of debris. After getting her out, we go and find Davis instead. Listening to the panicked Rio try to stop us as we go. As we venture further into the wreckage, we watch as demons arrive on the scene to try and kill as many survivors who happen to be in the area. We continue onwards, this time needing to use stealth to get through this section of the game, as we will join the other civilians if we're caught. Miles Morales is a character that we will be playing as in later parts of the game, but his gameplay also sees you needing to stealthily make your way through designated levels, much akin to MJ's gameplay. Eventually, we make it to the stage. As we try to attack one of the demons from behind, we get countered, and just as we're about to be killed, our attacker is halted by Martin Lee, who prompts them all to leave. That leaves us to search for Davis. Moments later we find him deceased. We beg for him to wake up, but noticing the blood soaking from his shirt only makes the fact that he's no longer with us sink in even more. Staring into space and distraught, we cut to a week later at the funeral of Jefferson Davis. Everyone's here to pay their respects, including Norman Osborn, who promptly takes his leave. Miles is standing over the coffin, lost in grief as Peter tries to console him. This is only returned with Miles snapping at him before he walks away. Rio apologizes on his behalf before she, too, takes her leave. Back with Peter, we listen in as Watanabe asks for solid evidence that Martin Lee is the leading perpetrator of the attack, and subsequently to this we listen in as he expresses that he believes that somehow the blame is on him. It will be important later, but for now the topic of the conversation is put aside in favor of finding Martin Lee. On our way to a recycling center that could supposedly give us evidence as to where he may be, we listen in as MJ tells us that Martin Lee is believed to have the ability to control people's minds, and influence them into doing things that they wouldn't normally do, as it's considered bringing the negative part of them out. When we get to the recycling center, we take out some of the demons in the area and then proceed with our investigation. We learn where Martin Lee is planning to attack next, Mayor Osborn's campaign offices. We find equipment, bombs, among much more evidence which points towards the true intentions of the demons. They aren't planning to engage in a gang war, more rather they're trying to steal from Fisk and adequately equip themselves to go after Norman Osborn, and thus they set off to try and stop them before they can launch their attack. When we get there, we take out more demons, and inside of the base, we find a place worth investigating called Pale Horse Rides, and more demon bases to eliminate around the city, opening up such an option if we ever choose to indulge in more side content in the game. After fighting more demons, a group of unknown armored individuals arrive and begin attacking the demons. Before they can kill one of them, we stop them, which causes them to surround us. An unknown woman jumps from the helicopter, which sees us get trapped by a trap previously laid that slipped unnoticed. Before anything can be done on top of this, Watanabe arrives and tells them to release us. This woman is introduced as Silva Seblinova, who runs a private security force by the name of Sable International. They've been hired by Osborn, though for whatever reason we're unsure of. After she threatens us, we take our leave. Speaking with Watanabe later on the phone, we learn that they found the evidence that we previously uncovered, but nothing that leads back to Martin Lee. We're still working on that, but for now we decide to head over to Feast to see if we can find anything in Martin Lee's office. When we get there, we talk to May, in a moment where we see Peter recall what it was like losing Ben Parker, in which he states that it helped him to stay busy. Maybe it'll help Miles Morales too. Peter gives May his mother's number, so after that we decide to go and investigate Lee's office. Reading his diary, we see as he documents his feelings in regards to Fisk being arrested. He's unsure and conflicted about whether he wants to go through and execute his plan, but ultimately does so, writing that the demon is hungry and he doesn't know if he's strong enough to hold it back. After solving a puzzle with a shrine, we gain access to a hidden room behind it, in which we find a tape which sees Martin Lee discussing his power. It appears to be based off his feelings of anger. We also find the file that MJ tried to take at the auction house, in which we take so we can use it to decipher what Lee might be planning next. After escaping the now wired room that was built to destroy evidence, Lee finds us exiting outside. May also appears, in which they briefly discuss the bombing at the Osborn rally before Martin takes his leave again. Outside, he corrupts homeless people to attack us as he drives away. We tell Watanabe about our findings and inform her about a substance created by Oscorp by the name of Devil's Breath. But for now, we get a call from Otto, excitedly telling us to come to the laboratory. When we get there, we find that there is a lot of new equipment, in which we're told that Otto called in every last favor and took out a few loans in order to have the funding for their work. As we observe another test on prosthetics, an error seems to be present, in which sees the experiment failed. Otto lashes out and explains to us the history between himself and Norman. The two were partners in college. They became friends and started a business by the name of Oscorp. Norman became obsessed with genetics and began a project which kickstarted a conflict between the two based on their different perspectives of ethicality regarding it. Eventually, Otto left and has relied on grants ever since. For that reason, he needs their work on prosthetics to succeed. Peter goes to fix the errors present in the work of Otto, after which the experiment succeeds and the next step is to work on the neural interface. Peter pledges his loyalty to working for Otto, in which after this moment of bonding he leaves to go and answer a missed call from MJ. When we eventually meet with her, she tells us about her findings at an address previously disclosed to her. This is where we play through another stealth section of the game, in which she finds blueprints of some sort inside of an office as well as GPS trackers. Before she can investigate any further though, she hears them incoming and decides to leave. The two discuss their plan to team up, as well as Devil's Breath, before it gets interrupted by a crime currently ongoing in the residence belonging to Charles Standish. So that's where we'll be heading to next. All we know about Charles is that he works in the financial department at Oscorp, and whatever the reason may be for his attack has something in relation to Devil's Breath. After fighting through more demons, we find Charles Standish, in which we uncover that the demons found payroll information about an individual by the name of Isaac Delaney, and so after getting Charles out of the building that's now swarmed with demons, we set off to find out more about Dr. Delaney. MJ sends us a photo, in which tells us that he is at a party of some sort, though to find which of the costumed individuals is him, we need to go to the party ourselves to find him. When we get there, the demons have reached him just moments before we did and begin taking Dr. Delaney away. Before we can stop them, we need to fight off an attendant who's having a bit too much fun. After fighting him as well as more demons, we watch as Dr. Delaney is taken into a room with Martin Lee as he forces him to tell him the name of his lab partner at Oscorp. He eventually uses his power to influence him, in which he utters the name Morgan Michaels. He's then handed a gun, in which he uses to shoot himself before Peter can stop him from doing so. We fight through more demons and corrupted attendees of the party as Martin gets away. After we're done clearing them all out, we call Yuri and inform her that they need to find Morgan Michaels before Martin does. Morgan is suspected to be the head scientist of the Devil's Breath project, and if we want to even come close to understanding what it is, let alone getting to it before the wrong hands grab hold of it, we need to find him. Though, there is one issue. Sable International have him under their protection but refuses to tell Watanabe where he is, though Peter has an idea on how to find him. Calling with MJ, we learn that Fisk and Osborn created a lab but kept it away from the regulators to focus on developing Devil's Breath in private, though some records of it are kept with Norman, among Fisk keeping invoices of the finances regarding such a thing in order to use as leverage against Norman should that time ever come. So, with that, we set off for Oscorp headquarters, in hopes of finding something related to Devil's Breath there. After taking down some of the security modules, we find our way into the office and learn about a project called GR27, a substance designed to be able to cure every genetic disease, but in its current state, it's akin to a bioweapon as it kills a person rather than curing them. But for that reason, lab technologists have nicknamed the project devil's breath, and the only existing sample is kept on Morgan Michaels' personnel, and if it were to ever be released, it would cause a global pandemic. We call MJ and let her know of our findings, in which she tells us that she's currently at a Sable compound in Central Park trying to reach Charles Standish, of whom is being kept there. Out of concern, Peter goes towards the area to try and find her, and when he gets there, he sees a gun being pointed at MJ and jumps in, not understanding what is being said between the two. 15 minutes earlier, we play as MJ trying to sneak through security to get to Charles Standish, and thus we play through another stealth section of the game. This is where we're introduced to using lures during MJ's gameplay sections, which in my opinion adds a new layer of approach to our gameplay as we no longer need to rely on what's around us to move forth. After that though, we speak with Charles Standish, who points a gun at MJ. After calming him down and introducing herself, Standish tells her that Sable has Morgan but is completely ignoring something in Grand Central. Though, before we can learn any more, Peter dives in and interrupts, mistaking Charles for a Sable officer. It creates some noise pollution, which causes for Peter to grab MJ and get out of there before they can learn any more. After an awkward swing back home, the two argue a bit over the phone, and we learn that according to Peter, the two broke up because MJ wanted to focus on her career, but according to MJ, the two broke up because Peter wouldn't stop treating her like a baby. Peter tries to prevent discussion of this any further, in which sees MJ disclose her findings. When asked about the Grand Central, she dismisses any discussion of it. The two end their phone call, and after that we see Peter blame himself for this incident. I really like the way that this conflict in particular is written. The game doesn't try to portray anyone as being in the wrong. It was a communication breakdown between the two, and while we see both of them blame Peter, ultimately the game doesn't tell you whose side to be on. The game gives you the situation, gives the difference in perspective regarding it, and lets you decide. And that's something I really appreciate about this game's writing overall. MJ is a character who wants to be more involved and take her own stance regarding her investigations and work. Peter is understandably worried for her and doesn't want to see her hurt, but in doing so, MJ feels as though his constant attempts at convincing her against something can often make him come off as overprotective, and feels as though Peter needs to learn to rely on other people as opposed to doing everything himself. I really appreciate just how much work went into this game's writing and just the many themes and concepts that it juggles within. The main characters have their admirable qualities and flaws in their own way, but ultimately they all grow by the end of the game. Especially as we'll see, the game's writing really does shine in a lot of scenes that I will talk about in due course. For now, I'll say that I really do appreciate how the game writes this scene. It's not actively blaming anyone, and both characters' perspectives are shown for the player to decide for themselves. With that, we go to the laboratory to find Otto, who's hard at work on the neural web and preparing for another test. After configuring his work, we cut to Otto testing and succeeding. Peter helps him take off the prosthetic, in which he asks about the noticeable twitch Otto would exhibit. Otto mentions that he has a degenerative neurological disease, which sees the mind continuing to work but the muscle ceasing to function, and their work on prosthetics could help prevent that. Otto tries to mention that if Peter learning about this caused Peter to want to pursue something with more of a future, then to let him know, but Peter cuts him off. He joined Otto for his intelligence, his mind and his conscience. The fact that he not only wants to help himself but others too drives Peter to stay by his side, and if that's not going anywhere, then neither is he. The two embrace, showing their friendship become more realized between them. Otto never told anyone about his condition because he was ultimately afraid that doing so would serve as a reason to not want to work for him, seen by the fact that the moment he tells Peter, he immediately jumps to his career options and perhaps considering working for someone else, but Peter disproves that. We can see his facial expression that Otto is truly touched by what he said, and that leads to me wanting to appreciate something else. The voice acting and facial capture in this game is phenomenal. Yuri Lowenthal as Spider-Man does a really good job at conveying the two sides of Peter Parker, one where he's softer and gentler, and as Spider-Man where he's more confident and sure of himself. The facial capture being done by John Bubniak, I'm very sorry if I butchered that name, and also really does a good job at portraying Peter's facial expressions, especially so towards the end of the game. Now, I am aware of the swap from Bubniak to Ben Jordan. Of course, while I prefer one over the other, this change doesn't really bother me that much, but for that preference alone, I am playing the original PS4 version on the PS5 without any of the upgrades that come with the remastered edition, which you need to pay for. I think Ben Jordan does a good job, but all these years I've played and familiarized myself with Bubniak's face on the model, so I suppose for nostalgic reasons I've grown to prefer his face over Jordan's. Still, I'm welcome to the change in Spider-Man Miles Morales and the upcoming Spider-Man 2. With that aside though, I also think that William Saliers does a great job as Otto Octavius among the many other voice actors who lent their talent to this game. As we'll see though, Saliers' performance as Otto really does shine in later parts of the game. With that though, we review an article that Otto recently read that could aid them in proceeding with work on the neural interface. Peter says that the information contained within could be dangerous. It could cause injury to Otto and even alter his personality if they don't proceed delicately with this. With a brief warning to Otto, Peter leaves for Feast while be introducing Miles around for his first day. Though after we stop a few thugs from robbing him, we briefly teach him how to fight and a few quick tips for doing so, after of which we play as Miles Morales who's making his way to the Feast Center. Sable Interactive has taken over the city, and has littered it with checkpoints to serve as a way to prevent malicious actors from laying waste to the city. Miles decides that this will take too long, and through the use of his hacking app, decides to sneak past. Akin to how MJ uses lures to her provided by Peter, Miles has a hacking application developed by himself and a friend of his, which we use throughout out this section of the game to get past the Sable checkpoint and proceed on our way to the Feast Center. One of the many details I want to appreciate about this game's writing is how it portrays the theme of loss. Miles and Rio, while deeply affected by what happened, both were traumatized, and the game shows that they are dealing with it in their own ways. Just through the dialogue between him and his mother, it shows that regardless, the two are still there for one another. Miles doesn't make as much of an appearance in this game, but the parts of the game where he is really does show his growth as a character as the game goes on. Inside the Feast Center, he meets Peter, whom shows him around and tells him to meet some of the residents, helping a few of them and serving them coffee. He eventually runs into an old man smacking a TV, though when Miles fixes it, he's reminded of Davis, and tries to leave after the old man makes a disrespectful remark about him. Peter arrives though, and defends Miles, and so after introducing him to May, Peter leaves to go and oversee Morgan Michaels' transfer to a new safe house. However, as Sable is preparing to do so, they're attacked by demons. Morgan is taken to Lee, and they attempt to drive away. After fighting demons and trying to stop their truck, we try to take the Devil's Breath. Martin takes us to an unknown place, familiar yet corrupted as it displays the award ceremony. In attempts to get us to join him, he talks about Norman, referring to him as a cancer to the city. A lot of the main villains in this game have issues with Norman for reasons that we'll see in due course, but for now, after refusing and fighting through his fever dream, we stop the truck from hitting and killing multiple citizens, but in doing so we crash into a building. We find that they've taken the Devil's Breath, though before we can discuss it any further, Silver Sable arrives and blames us for the incident. Eventually Michaels agrees to go with her, and we focus on trying to track down Martin Lee. Eventually getting to the truck Martin was seen driving away, and we find that he, alongside Devil's Breath, isn't there. We try to call MJ, only to suspect that she's up to something when she doesn't pick up. Cutting to her perspective, she's at an Oscorp exhibition, deciding to document her findings to share them with Peter later, though in doing so she's found by Martin Lee and attempts to get away from his grasp. Chaos quickly ensues, and everyone attending is held hostage, with Lee's demand being that he wants Norman there in 30 minutes on his own. So we alert Peter and wait for him, and when he eventually gets there, we watch as he tries to quietly take out the demons. I think that this is a really nice but brief section of the gameplay. Watching Peter in action from someone else's perspective was an interesting idea and it executed really well. Furthermore, I also really like the added stealth elements to the stealth gameplay seen in this section of the game. The parts of MJ's gameplay as well as Peter's are combined for a really well made experience in this part of the game. With that aside, Peter tries to get MJ out of there, but she insists on helping him get everyone else out of there as well as preventing Lee from releasing the Devil's Breath. So after quickly making her way to it, Peter causes enough of a distraction for them to begin the timer to release it. So while he keeps them busy, MJ goes to try and prevent it from doing so. MJ evacuates everyone from the building while we fight off more demons. Subsequently to that, we give chase to Lee who's trying to escape on a train. So after getting in, we enter a boss fight. It isn't anything too difficult, so after beating him, Sable arrests him and secures the Devil's Breath. When Peter tries calling MJ, she says that she isn't ready to talk with him yet, and she says that she needs time to figure things out, and maybe she'll call him tomorrow. With that, we go to the laboratory. According to Otto, we're just in time to celebrate. He's got the arms functioning, and it was Peter's work on the neural web that was integral to their completion. Otto's overjoyed, Peter's worried. There's a lot that they haven't tested, and even more that they don't know. So he reviews Otto's work and finds many harmful errors that could alter Otto's personality, mind, and mood, as the neural web could be affecting other parts of his brain. Otto snaps and tells him that they've done enough testing. He doesn't feel like a failure. Peter calms him down and assures him that they're close, that they just need to do more testing. Otto tells him to go on that while Peter's out, he'll find solutions to a few bugs. Thanking Peter for everything, Otto turns his attention to the TV when he's gone. Seeing Norman enrages him as he activates the arms and smashes it. Back with Peter, he decides to go and check on Feast. The morale of everyone there must have been shaken since the ordeal with Martin. But when he gets there and talks about it with May, she mentions that isn't the Lee she wants to remember. She wants to remember the best part of him, Feast and everything he did for the shelter. When asking about MJ, she mentions the real Peter, which alludes to something that will be made apparent in due time. Though when news of a Sable vehicle being attacked reaches TV, Peter's nowhere to be found. Calling Watanabe, he doesn't receive an answer, so he decides to go and check on things there himself. When he gets there, the Devil's Breath is gone, but Watanabe tells him to jump at the helicopter she's operating, for they have bigger problems on their hands. The cells of Riker's prison have been breached, meaning all of the prisoners have escaped and are minutes away from entering the streets. Meanwhile, Sable handles the issue regarding the missing Devil's Breath. As prisoners reach the front gates, we jump down to fight them, and there are a lot of them. After we take them out, we see that the raft has also been breached, seen from Electro, who shocks the helicopter to the ground. Landing there, Watanabe goes to the power controls while we chase after Electro, all while fighting escaped prisoners along the way. Eventually, when we catch up to him upon the roof of a building, we find that this path was coordinated, as the rest of the villains show up. Peter is attacked after brief moments of resistance, before Dr. Otto Octavius appears, warning him to stay out of their way. He throws him off, and in 24 hours, Devil's Breath has infected the city. May Parker is coughing blood as it's noticeably taking a toll on her. Spider-Man has been deemed a fugitive and a priority target, and word of Norman's secretive operations have got out. Hell has broken loose into the city. After doing our part to keep the peace in the city, Watanabe calls and tells us that 2 members of the Raft are currently causing havoc. We should head to either one of the precincts to try and even the odds. This city has become overrun by convicts. When we get there, we watch as Rhino wrecks the streets, but for now, we need to help the officers. After fighting off convicts and learning what it means to be considered Sable's priority target, we go to try and stop Electro, as Rhino is on the move and Electro is wrecking an electric havoc of his own. Electro's charged the building, trapping officers inside of the precinct. We need to take down the Transformers and the demons surrounding them if we want to free them. So after doing that, we're tasked with aiding them to take out more demons who've arrived on the scene, after of which we need to go to Feast's sister location as convicts have set fire to the building. When we get there, we find Miles trying to help an exhausted May. As Peter shoots a web at the platform, he uses all of his strength to ensure it doesn't fall with them on it. MJ arrives. She pushes a wooden floor that can be used as a platform to get Miles and May across. Though, when the two eventually get to the window, Peter is hit by falling debris. And just as the web he shoots fails to hit something, it's grabbed by Miles and MJ, who happen to the platform as they try to escape the burning building. MJ and Peter are alone on the roof of a building together, which sees the two take the time to finally talk. MJ apologizes and so does Peter, though when Miles arrives, the three team up and come up with a plan. MJ is to track down an anti-serum for Devil's Breath, Miles is to keep the peace at Feast, and Peter is going to find and stop Otto, as well as everyone working for him. After going to the site where Otto released Devil's Breath, we track down what appears to be his base of operations where he left everyone who was working for him tapes, as well as evidence for how he'll proceed with his plans. Though after finding out that Martin Lee is going after the anti-serum, we find that this has been a trick by Otto who's wired the place to blow up. We then make our way out of there in time but are then tied up and taken by the Vulture. We let MJ know of our findings and that we need to find the Oscorp laboratory before Lee does. We're taken to Electro where we find that the two are working together and thus we engage in a boss fight. After we finish taking them both out, we interrupt the conversation by Otto, where Peter tries to talk some sense into him. But when Otto doesn't listen and instead continues with his plan, Peter crushes the earpiece and swings away. Exhausted, he closes his eyes and finds that when he awakes, it's midday. Going after Scorpion is his next intention, and thus that's where we head to next. Before we can engage in a fight with Scorpion, he injects us with some sort of poison, which warps our mind. The city is warped as a result of the poison, and so we decide to create an antitoxin. In the moment, playing through this section of the game gradually turned more and more into a drag as it proceeded, but in hindsight it really is an integral part of the game as it gives us insight into Peter's mind and conscience, his self-doubts and all of his troubles being realized in this strange fever dream, primarily how Peter perceives the transformation of Otto turning on him and everything the two worked on was his fault. In his mind he should have been there to stop it but ultimately feels as though he wasn't enough. In this section of the game, it isn't Otto speaking, it's Peter's emotions and feelings towards this situation speaking. I feel as though this section of the game could have been done better. Maybe make it less repetitive and not more of just tasking the player to go to the thing, but the theme it conveys is excellently conveyed. With that, after curing ourselves, we find out that we're, how did getting poisoned do that to you? Anyhow, we decide we need to take a quick trip to Feast to see how May's been doing. When we get there, she appears run down. She's weak and can barely stand. We tell her to rest for a bit while we help out at the center. Meanwhile, Miles is at a place filled with convicts and trying to find antibiotics for Feast, and so we play through another stealth section of the game as him. When we find them, we become a bystander as Rhino and Scorpion try to torture information out of Sable officers. We decide to take our leave, but accidentally attract the attention of Rhino in doing so. So we stealthily make our way out of the area, and just as we're about to let May know that we have the antibiotics, we find a man being attacked and shaken down for his wallet. Showing a brief moment of hesitance, Miles shouts at them to leave him alone, which he then knocks one of the convicts out, scaring the other away. Back with Peter, we now know what Rhino's up to, and we're headed to stop him. When we get there, we stop him from nearly killing 2 Sable officers before engaging in a boss fight with him. After fighting him for a bit, Scorpion intervenes, and thus we fight both of them simultaneously. One of the many things I want to mention is the difference in dynamic between the different duos that we fight. Previously we fought Electro and Vulture, in which saw both of them trying to keep the morale and motivate each other even when they'd accidentally hit each other and trying to attack Spider-Man. They got along and worked alongside each other as opposed to against each other, as the latter is what Scorpion and Rhino does. Rhino is a loner for a reason, that's because he doesn't get along with Scorpion at all. That's a detail I really like in this game. It really is a reminder of just how much attention to detail is present here. Eventually the two blame each other after getting beaten, and thus we trap them inside of an enclosed space to figure things out. Getting a call from MJ, we decide that she should be the one who goes into Norman's penthouse to find the location of the Oscorp Devil's Breath laboratory. Playing as MJ, we get into his penthouse and uncover what truly happened to Harry Osborn. Everyone around him was told that he left for a trip for Europe, though that may not be as true as we all think. Harry Osborn's mother had a genetic disease which served as motivation for Norman to begin developing a cure for it, though during its development the disease got the best of her which caused her death. He, alongside his cure, was too late, though this genetic disease was passed on to Harry Osborn, in which Norman was determined to ensure that it didn't get the best of him too. He would do whatever it took, break every safety regulation in the book to ensure that it worked, and in doing so became obsessed with genetics, designed to be a cure for every genetic disease. GR27 in its current form was akin to a bioweapon, which caused the body to tear itself apart in trying to repair itself. Lab technicians dubbed it Devil's Breath. Harry isn't in Europe, he's at an undisclosed location sent away for treatment. This is why Norman was so obsessed with genetics, and is also why he's currently doing everything he can to ensure GR27 is a success. That aside, as MJ finally finds the laboratory where we finally uncover everything that had happened to Martin Lee. As a child, he was unable to control his powers, and in trying to solve this issue, Norman Osborn ran experiments on a young Martin Lee which ended up killing his parents. This project was deemed unethical by Otto Octavius, who was disgusted at its execution. These two initiated the project that created Martin Lee, and it was this very project that took Martin's parents from him for the rest of his life. MJ, discovering this, downloads the file to an external hard drive, and after alerting Silver Sable, she gets out of there. She soon finds herself surrounded and jumps off the balcony to be caught by Peter. After learning about everything, Peter begins to blame himself, in which MJ assures him to find Norman and the cure, while herself and Miles look after Feast. We begin heading for the Oscorp laboratory, though when we get there, it's already under attack by the demons. After getting through all of the demons outside, as well as the Sable officers, we're ambushed by Silver Sable, of whom we give an ultimatum. We can fight each other or we can fight the demons, but it can't be both at the same time. She ultimately chooses the latter and chooses to take out the incoming demons while we take on Lee. Inside the building, there's nothing but wreckage within. Inside, we're attacked by Martin as he talks to us about his life, how at a young age an experiment initiated by Norman on himself killed his parents. After that, he worked as hard as he could throughout moments after to make them proud. Feast and all of the good he did within was to honor their legacy. However, in his mind, they could never truly rest until Norman meets his demise. It's here we find the true source of Martin's power. His emotions, his rage and his anger, his regret and lust for revenge is what fuels him. Moments earlier, we watch as Morgan Michaels gives Lee the anti-serum, before turning his attention to trying to kill Norman. Spider-Man arrives just in time and tries to talk Martin out of his revenge plan, though in the end we end up fighting him. After taking out the demon within, we calm Lee down. Norman must pay for what he's done, but he can't do that if he's dead. We take the anti-serum from him, but before we can do anything else, Otto arrives and thus we enter a power struggle with him for the anti-serum. Ultimately, he gets the better of us. After he gets the serum, he turns his attention to Norman, taking him captive. Sable finds Peter, injured and seemingly on the brink of death, though through his pain, Peter requests that they take him to Feast, in which when they get there, they begin doing everything they can to save him. MJ arrives, in which after Morgan is done, he says that Peter needs rest. When he leaves, Peter gets up to check on May. They say that she can go at any moment. Peter's in doubt regarding whether he can beat Otto or not, in which MJ says one thing. Maybe he needs to reassess the situation and find the weakness to the arms with the help of Spider-Man's friend, Peter Parker. And so, we see him make his way to the laboratory. Meanwhile, Miles is busy trying to find a box of supplies, though in doing so sees himself get bitten by a spider. Back with Peter, he's on his way to the laboratory to see if he can find anything he can use to destroy the arms built by himself and Otto. Beyond this point of the game is the finale, in which I want to take this moment to discuss the progression system and the suits within the game. The progression system of the game is, in my opinion, really well done, providing upgrades that are great to have as additions but ultimately aren't required to enjoy the game. You could, if you wanted to, go through the entire game ignoring the system entirely and it would have very little effect on your playthrough. I personally didn't interact with it very much until this very moment of the game, and doing so really made me appreciate how little the game holds you back without it. It gives you everything you need for a nice and sufficient experiment right from the beginning of the game, and that's something I can appreciate. Furthermore, the same applies to the suits within the game. Each one in the game has its own suit ability that comes with it, which aren't necessary for gameplay but are nice additions should you choose to engage with it. I really like how these games refrain from interacting with these systems at all and still have the enjoyable experience with the game regardless. While it would help to have these upgrades, you ultimately don't need them, and for that reason I really like how well executed this system is. With that aside though, welcome to the finale of the game. At the laboratory, Peter looks back on the time he spent with Otto achieving the unachievable, though with a creation of his own, he's forced to destroy it. So he spends a good portion of time creating a suit of his own, the anti-Orc suit. When he's finished, he sees news reports of Otto taking Norman to the top of the Oscorp tower, in which he sets off. With Norman, Otto threatens to throw him off the tower if he doesn't expose himself and tell the world what he did, if he doesn't tell them the truth. Norman, even with his life at stake, tells Otto his version of the truth, and that he saw no worth in Otto when he wasn't working for him. Looking at him in sheer disbelief and anger, he throws him off. As Norman falls, he's thrown to safe ground on a building, and smirking at the now prepared Spider-Man, he leaves. Back with Peter, he pleads one last time for Otto to peacefully hand over the anti-serum, though he's only met with refusal. This is the final fight of the game, which sees Peter, even during the fight, trying to reach an Otto that's no longer there. He sees that iteration of himself as a failure, a loser as he puts it, and knocked it away in pursuit of finally giving Norman the punishment he deserves. It soon comes to a point where parts of Peter's mask are destroyed, which reveal that Otto knew who he was the entire time. Angered, he continues the fight even with destroyed web shooters. The stakes here are set beautifully. This fight just got all the more personal for Peter. Both characters here are tired and hurt but still continue to fight regardless, with neither backing down. Eventually Peter finds himself trapped, but with opportunity to deactivate the arms in front of him. At the cost of being impaled by the arms, he eventually deactivates the arms and Otto falls down. Peter falls in pursuit of the anti-serum, in which when he gets to it, Otto tries as a last ditch effort to get Peter to join his side. That wasn't Otto. Peter was right, the neural web affected his mind. Peter said he'd never leave him, why go back on his word now? The arms can be fixed. Together, and the secret of Spider-Man will forever remain safe with Otto Octavius. Ultimately, after so much consideration, Peter walks away, listening to the screams of a defenseless Otto as he does. I love this scene. It's my favorite in the entire game. For one, Otto tries to use the concept of responsibility against Peter but twists it to fit his agenda. It's their responsibility of people who have their powers to use their talents in the service of others. For Peter, that's helping those around him, as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man. For Otto, that's taking down Norman. And then there's Otto using Peter's words against him, saying that what Peter thought just now wasn't Otto. A part of this scene which really touched me. Even if this video were to be 1,000,000 pages long, all of those words could never describe why I love this scene so much. It's one of those emotions you can never properly put down on paper. You can try, but there'll always be something missing. My feelings towards this scene embodies that for me, with it all being elevated by the amazing performances of the voice actors. The emotion and facial capture truly express how the characters feel in this scene. Otto realizing that he's not winning Peter over, and Peter himself being conflicted and torn over what to do here. Ultimately, he does what he feels is the best thing to do and walks away. Back at the feast center, Morgan Michaels mentions that the sample is viable, but they'll need the entire thing to create more doses. Looking at May, Peter asks what will happen if they use the sample to cure someone right now, in which if they do, there won't be enough for the others. He looks at the people suffering outside. Michaels gives him a moment, in which he speaks to May, who asks him to take off his mask. She's known for a while now. Once angry at Otto for this very thing, he cries for May at her side, never wanting her to worry for him. She's proud, as Ben would be too, conflicted between what to do, whether to save his aunt or the people around him. May tells him that he does know. After hesitating for a moment, he puts the anti-serum down at the table and simply weeps for May in her final moments. Later, we find order being restored into the city. Anti-serum doses are being handed out. Everyone attended the funeral of May Parker, and Otto is finally put behind bars. Another brilliant scene. 3 months later, MJ has a job as an associate editor, and Peter's finally getting a new apartment. He'll be staying with Miles for a while until it's ready, though MJ offers that he can always stay with her. After an awkward back and forth, he agrees with a kiss, thus ending Marvel's Spider-Man. With that, let's discuss some of the extras. First off, there are a few cutscenes that I do want to mention without going into too much detail about. Remember that cutscene where Miles is bitten by a spider? It might have had a bit of an effect on him because he has the same abilities as Peter now. Furthermore, we also have the cutscene showing Norman revealing that he's been keeping Harry all this time, promising that he will keep trying to find a cure, teasing the appearance of the symbiote for the upcoming sequel for this game later this year. As for the gameplay, there are quite a few extras. One of the many things I have been choosing not to talk about until now is that of the side content, which I think is enjoyable to an extent. In the game, you have the option to do things like photography, indulge in Harry's research stations, stop crimes, and many more indulgences around the city, all of which provide you with their respective tokens. I personally believe that these are enjoyable, but get old really fast. I did spend some time doing a bit of the side activities, especially so during points in the game where it paused the main story and before the finale, which I do feel as though pausing the game's main story to allow for side content really did warp my view on it. Normally when it comes to games, I generally don't do the side content, or if I do, it's very minimal. I still grow to appreciate it as being something you can do as post-game content should you please to continue playing through the game afterwards, in which I personally felt that with this game I felt bitter towards it for having to do as such while waiting for the game to let me do the next mission. A lot of these missions are just going to the thing and doing something. It's very quick and concise but exists in large quantities. For example, obtaining landmark tokens is very easy. Simply go to something, take a picture and get your landmark token. While doing that once or twice is fine, doing it in large quantities can get old very fast. I understand that indulging in post-game content may not be for everyone, but in that case, most games give you the option not to. This game just forces you to do so at points in the main story in which it harms the player's view of the side content in general. Though, one thing I do want to talk about is the story of this game and how much I enjoyed it. It truly was an amazing experience and it had my attention the entire time. Everything from the twist that Otto is the main villain to Peter trying his best to ensure that the city doesn't fall apart is executed amazingly, and this story is truly memorable. The gameplay was also really great. Everything from the swinging to the combat felt amazing, and it really did contribute to the overall enjoyability of this game. With that though, I want to conclude things. Overall, I think that this game is amazing. It features amazing gameplay, a beautifully written and told story, among many other factors such as combat and whatnot. I truly appreciate and love this game, and I couldn't recommend it more. I think that it has its issues regarding side content and broken pacing at points, but looking past that, I think that this game is truly worth your time. Especially now, with the game coming to PC, it couldn't be more available than it is now. So, I implore you to play Marvel's Spider-Man. A truly brilliant game that is worth your money and time. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I apologize for the re-upload. For those who don't know, I originally made these videos in August and uploaded them as parts, in which when I gave my Yakuza Kiwami video this treatment of combining them all into one last month in October, I did begin thinking I should do the same with this video, and thus here we are. I'm recording this outro in November. I've just released the Yakuza Kiwami 2 video, in which I hope you enjoyed that video as well as this one too. For any newcomers to this channel, if you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about next, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then my socials will be linked in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. With that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.